Good evening, friends. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for turning up again at the Gnitavonni Book Club event. And today, of course, we had just that brief intro into the program today. And that music is a classical piece, an opera piece. But surprisingly, many of us know the composer. And you wonder, what has that got to do with books and literature? Well, just so you know, that composition was made, that operatic composition was by a famous philosopher whom many of us probably come across in our studies of history or literature or political science. And his name is Jean-Jacque Rosseau. And for many people who studied European history, the history of the Enlightenment period, Jean-Jacques Rosseau was one of the leading fathers and one of the inspirational figures behind the French Revolution in 1776. Jean-Jacques Rosseau was born on this day in 1712. That is July the 3rd, 1712 in Geneva. And we're picking up his work today because there is a confluence between his work and his approach to philosophy and the significance of today in the modern era. Because today also marks the 56th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act by President Lyndon Baines Johnson in the USA. So we're looking at literary tradition. We're looking at classical works of literature and philosophy and putting them alongside what is happening today. Because part of the reason why we do this show is not just to talk about books for the sake of books, also to situate literature and thinking within the context of the human experience. So today is the anniversary, posthumous birthday of Jean-Jacques Rosseau. And Jean-Jacques Rosseau was born in Geneva in 1712. And his famous books are kind of classical, you know, the best of the classical traditions. So you have, he wrote a book on the social contract. I wrote a discourse on inequality. And in his lifetime, Jean-Jacques Rosseau was considered a maverick character. He was seen as a rebel, and he was chased about by the European elites at the time from place to place, so he didn't have rest. So for many of us who are looking at the tradition of activism and the tradition of the rational man, the man of conviction, one of the very best examples we have in the literary tradition is Jean-Jacques Rosseau. Jean-Jacques, if you read his page on Wikipedia, you will see his tribulations as somebody who's been victimized by the establishment and also being looked after by powerful figures. And in that kind of contradiction, you find that for people in struggle, like black people in struggle around the world, sometimes you need allies and you don't necessarily make enemies of everybody. So you'll be looked after and they can advance your cause as fast as they can. But I think one of the most important parts of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's writing was his idea of the social contract. And he believed in the innate goodness of man. And when you look at that kind of almost, people call maybe a sentimental or a childlike approach to life, believing in the innate goodness of man. And that it is things like politics and property and interests that causes man and woman or human beings to misbehave when there's competition. And he believed that the idea of the social contract is that we can have an arrangement where we live peaceably amongst ourselves. And there is a very popular Yoruba saying from Nigeria which says that that is, the sky is wide enough to accommodate every kind of bird to fly without colliding into one another. And the idea of the social contract that Jean-Jacque Rosseau projects is essentially that kind of principle, that we can live at peace if we know our rules. If you accept, you do this for me, I do that for you. We have a range of responsibilities and shared communal values. Then we can get some happiness and live as dignified human beings. That's for me the essential piece about Jean-Jacque Rosseau. But also, and this is one of the reasons again why we do this program. And I suppose for many of us, COVID-19 has inspired us to become more of that kind of person, to tap into our gifts. Jean-Jacque Rosseau was also a composer, and that piece that I played at the opening was composed by him. It's called, let me have a look again. The name of that piece, if I can risk my French, which I be tepid, J'ai perdu tout mon bonheur, and it's Le Devine du Village is an aria from an opera composed and that was performed, and part of the ways in which he made a lot of money. He made a lot of money, made a good living from his operatic compositions, and was also a writer, a very contentious writer, a man of conviction, and he had to balance between his radical interests and also his own financial well-being. He did take some very hard decisions, even from his own personal story. He wasn't a saint or somebody who is blameless in terms of his own, for example, his parental responsibility, which he abdicated at a point in his life. So we're not adulating him or glorifying Jean-Jacque Rosseau and ignoring his foibles. Was just a mere human being like you and I, but a man of conviction. I remember reading about his this composition I just played, which I might put it in a little bit later. Is that there was a king, I think of Genoa or some city, who actually, having heard this composition, wanted to keep him as the palace music director and pay him a life pension to work for him. And of course, strong-headed Mr. Rosseau said, "No, I'm not having that. I'm out." And he went on his travels, creating mayhem with his ideas and arguing contentiously about his convictions. So having introduced Jean-Jacque Rosseau, who was one of the inspirers, one of the whose thinking inspired part of the French Revolution and also indirectly the American Revolution. Because if you remember, the French Revolution took place in 1787, and he'd been active at that time. He died in 1778, by the way. And one of the things that he believed was that idea of equality. He objected to the class structure. He did not believe in the class structure and was vehemently opposed to it. And it was those kind of ideas that encouraged the Jacobins, as the word then, who were the militant figures in the French Revolution, to kind of upturn the established order and create the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité, and that's the story. So he featured quite major, it's a major feature in that episode in the European history, with the likes of my friend Montesquieu and a few of others rascals. But that is the place of Jean-Jacque Rosseau, which attests again to the multidimensionality of the human spirit. As we struggle with our mind and we put our minds of thoughts to words, we try to interpret them in poetry or write books, and the odd autobiography, which it's not been affected by selective amnesia. Then people tell their stories. But this story of Montesquieu, of Robespierre, Robespierre was also one of those characters who were in among the Jacobins during the French Revolution. Robespierre, Montesquieu, there was a third person there, And I hope somebody who is watching, who studied history, European history, will be able to help me with them. So it's happy birthday posthumously to Jean-Jacque Rosseau for inspiring critical thinking differently, and also for bringing out the humanity in the artistic expression of his music. I think that is fabulous, and I will just finish off that area from his composition Gnitavonni du village. So that was the composition by Jean-Jacque Rosseau, who to many of us we know as a philosopher, a writer, a poet, and essayist. Also, actually, a fabulous musical composer who actually did very well from his music. So thank you very much for hearing that story about Jean-Jacque Rosseau. And then at this point, we'll connect Jean-Jacque Rousseau's story to a contemporary history that has many dimensions. And that issue is that today, in 1964, President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act that gave Black Americans basically some freedom. This event, of course, is not isolated because it's in the context of the bigger struggle for affirmation. And in the last few hours, last couple of days, I've been doing some thinking about it. And one of my friends, Adewale Ajadi, he shared a video just about an hour and a half ago about the policy by the Federal Housing Authority or Commission in America, how they deprived African Americans in the 50s from purchasing properties in some new suburban estates, and how that action disempowered African Americans, as disempowered them. Basically, it has knuckled them permanently until now because of the lack of financial growth they would have gained from those that investment. I remember the video was narrated, and the guy in the narration said that those properties were sold at that time for about $10,000, less than $10,000 about 60 years ago. Properties are now worth about $500,000. And the families, the white families, have made a lot out of that to educate their children, to get the equity, and pass it on to their descendants. So the Civil Rights Act today, that was passed then, is another reminder that the work isn't done yet, and we need to continue to remember the life of George Floyd and what he died for and what his death represents. So that is as far as we go with the surrounding literary exhibition or dance around the literary world. Now I want to talk about something special that happened just a couple of days ago. Perhaps you've heard the news that for the very first time, two black writers have won the British Book Award for the first time. I mean, they have won, the Booker Prize, but this is the British Book Award. They won for the first time by black writers, and they are two fabulous female writers. I mentioned one of the books in an earlier program, but today I mentioned that book in a special way, as kind of a tribute to the excellence that pervades the writing by black people, like anybody else, And I think perhaps those who are not familiar with literature from Africa or from the Caribbean or even from America probably going to think that the black people actually write books. And of course, they write a lot of books. There are the established classics, the established authors, the big boys and the girls, the top men and women in the field who've been doing this stuff for decades. But you also have new writing, and there's some really interesting writing coming out of from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from the Americas, and these are sometimes you find them. They are the second or third generation of immigrants, and the diaspora is feeding out, is spewing out a lot of new writing. Then I'm going to mention these two writers, and so can kind of talk briefly about what they've achieved. So the first book that won the British Book of the Year award is this book here, Queenie. It's called Queenie. It's by Candice Carty-Williams. And I've read the book. I read it about sometime last year. I just saw the review in the Evening Standard, and I just fell in love with it, with the book straight away. The blurb by Jojo Moyes says, brilliant, timely, funny, heartbreaking. And it says also hilarious, compelling, painful, enlightening, honest. I loved it, by Dolly Alderton. And there's lots of tributes at the back of the book. It says by Jenny Colgan, sharp, relatable, and incredibly evocative. Let me find something that's about this book that they say. It says Candice Carty-Williams is a fantastic new writer who has written a deliciously funny, characterful, topical, and thrilling novel for our times. This book explores a lot of issues for example, the urban black woman trying to get on with a job, walking through relationships with family, with siblings, with people at work. And it's sometimes not difficult to read, but some part of it might find a bit difficult to digest. It is a book that you read and you'll chuckle, or you just gasp, wow, did you say that? Did that happen? So it's a modern book. It's a contemporary book. It's the kind of things that books talks about what people think in their minds and thinking out aloud, what people do in their private spaces and being narrated and said as it is. So that is Queenie. I cannot recommend it any better. Let me just read the blurb. This is part of what she writes. She says, sometimes I feel frantic and I feel like everything has just spun out of control, out of my hands. I don't know. I feel a bit like for a while I have been carrying 10 balls of wool and one ball fell. So I dropped another to catch it and still didn't catch it. I lost another one. Do you know what I mean? It's described Queenie Jenkins, who is the main character, she's described as a journalist, a catastrophist, expressive, aggressive, funny, dramatic, loved, lonely, enough. And this book has been described as a darkly comic and bitingly subversive take on life, love, race, and family. Queenie will have you nodding in recognition, crying in solidarity, and rooting for an unforgettable character. I'm going to put that book right here next to me because there's something we're going to do about it later on. So that is that. So let me talk about the second book that won the, I think Queenie's book won the Book of the Year award, British Book of the Year award, and the other book is by Bernardine Evaristo. I haven't got a copy of it, but I do have an image of it staring at me on my computer. It's a beautiful cover. It's got an image, the picture of the silhouette of a black woman with very colorful head scarf, the kind of high, big, funky ones, with blue, red, and dark blue and pink stripes and lines around it, and it's got a yellow cover, and at the top of it says winner of the Booker Prize 2019. That book won the Booker Prize in 2019, and this year it has won the British Book Award. It was also shortlisted last year for the Women's Prize for Fiction for this year, 2020, and it was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction. So I haven't even gone into that book yet, but when I think of Jean-Jacque Rosseau and I think of the civil rights art, I think about contemporary life in the diaspora around the world with the contentious issues, I cannot wait to have a bite into that book. So what I'm going to do about this, except to first of all congratulate both ladies, Bernardine Evaristo and Candice Carthy Williams. Both of them have been featured. We've put a short feature about them on the page for the Gnitavonni Book Club, so you can visit there and find out more about them. And the books obviously are available to buy on Amazon or any other in e-book form, or go to your Waterstones and order online, get a hard copy. I ordered mine hard copy from Waterstones sometime last year, and I've enjoyed it. My daughters also have had a peep into it, and they agree that it's a very beautiful book. So on that note, what are we going to be doing going forward? There's some interesting stuff coming your way. Now we're going to have another show next week Thursday, which is the 9th of July. Maybe we have something to talk about July, 4th of July, or some kind of remnants of the American dream, raveling or unraveling, whichever way you look at it. But that is part of the discourse to find perhaps a book, contemporary book, that narrates the current American experience. So that is next week, and you will get some information about what we're doing. I will share some info about what we're doing next week. So that is at that point for next week's show. Today, I want to start a proper book club kind of engagement. Last week we had a good fortune. We're very fortunate to have a friend, Mr. Adewale Adeniji, who read his poem, Apple on a Mango Tree. And that interaction was really enjoyed by a lot of people, with a lot of interaction, a lot of commentary. And I think it's just right that we should thank him again for coming to support us and share his artistic and creative elements with us. And we look forward to more of that. On the 19th of July, which is in 2 weeks' time, there will be a very special program on this show. The first African winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, Wole Soyinka. We took the liberty of calling him Wole Soyinka because we're kind of a modern man, modern woman. Of course, is the eminent Professor Wole Soyinka, and a chief of the Ijebu tribe, a great son of Egbaland, and an eminent citizen of Nigeria, and a man of great cosmopolitan interests. He'll be turning, I think his birthday is July the 13th, And I think Prof was born in, I think, 1934. So that'll make him getting on a bit into his mid-80s now. But he's having a fabulous time and he's producing new work. So what we're going to do as a tribute to this great son of the African mind, a great son of Africa, we're going to celebrate his achievements, his work, by dedicating the program on the 19th of July to Wole Soyinka. It will be basically a Wole Soyinka show. We will be exploring a lot of themes about what he has done and his influences, his sources, the source of his inspiration, and the resources that he has used, and how he has opened up a big stream for other writers to follow in his stead, or to criticize him and make their own sense of what he's been doing. Soyinka isn't just a writer, just like as we talk about Jean-Jacque Rosseau. Wole Soyinka is also, I mean, he's a playwright, he's a dramatist, he's an essayist, he's a poet, he's a politician. You have been a politician. He's been a civil rights activist and a human rights activist. He's a musician. He's a wine connoisseur. He is a chef. Just name it. Also designs his own clothes. So he has a very vast array of interests that he shows creativity. And that again just reminds me again of Jean-Jacque Rosseau. And also inspires me to repeat that message that none of us is born to be a mono-dimensional figure. Tap into everything you can. Be yourself. Have fun while doing so. Because there's more to you than just being an architect, or being a doctor, or a lawyer, or an engineer, as we Africans are wont to jump into these professions. And I again remember our brother, a younger friend, Falz, who is the son of a senior lawyer in Nigeria, who was turned out to be a fabulous musician and creative talent, and he's being himself. And so the education of the mind is not just about book education, which is what, again, another son of Africa, Fela Kuti, always said. Book knowledge is not enough. You need to tap into your talent. And I think on that note, we're going to do something today. So today we start officially as we go into the last 6 months of 2020. And we want to start talking about books and enjoying content of books alongside the things that we try to use to drive our interest in literature. And that is, we're going to start recommending or suggesting a book that we can read during the month. If you can, go as far as finishing the book. Then on the last episode of the month, and thankfully we have 5 episodes in July, on the last episode of July, which will be on the, if I can remember, the 19th, I'll find it. My numbers are not always very good. So the last Thursday of July, we'll have the final show for July. And on that show, I would like to have some of us come and talk about Queenie. So Queenie is officially the first recommendation from the Gnitavonni Book Club. So if you can, find a copy of it, and you have 5 weeks from today to come and talk about it and share your perspective about this lovely book. So, of course, before we go, I'd like to share some music with you. And today, what I'm going to kind of put out is another composition by, actually, let's spin it around. What I should do is find the other composition by Jean-Jacque Rosseau that we can use to sing goes out. So when the show is on, when the music comes on, I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks very much, and see you next week. And we'll talk about more books. Have a good evening. So, as we finish off today's program, we dedicated the program to the memory of Jean-Jacque Rosseau, and also to the work of Bernardino Evaristo and Candice Cartwright. So, on this note, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.